I do believe that no one can tell your story better than you can. And so whenever you experience something, you should absolutely be the first to narrate that and to share that experience and to really go in depth about what you feel and what you think and how you see the world, because we all see the world through our own, lenses. And it's really important that we recognize that and we tell stories from that vantage point.
Hello, and welcome back to Seek the Joy podcast. Happy Seek the Joy Tuesday. I'm your host, Sydney Weiss, and on the podcast today is Ardre Orie, social activist, entrepreneur, publisher, philanthropist, and author on a mission to give marginalized voices a platform to speak. And I so enjoyed sitting down with Ardre to have this conversation. We really talk about the power and the role of storytelling in shaping culture and shifting the narrative around race. The importance of sharing your story and why writing your own narrative provides a blueprint for future generations. Ardre shares the phenomenal work that she's doing with 13th and Joan and 100 Seeds of Promise, how she's created a home for really countless stories that would otherwise go untold, the important role of allies in this work, and how she's empowering men of color to document their own narratives. Plus, Ardre shares why it's so important to address the trauma that results from being a marginalized voice, how she's remaining spiritually grounded and prioritizing her wellness, the importance of protecting your joy and your peace, her biggest dream, and so much more. After my conversation with Ardre, I was really struck by the power of storytelling and using our voice and our platform to not only shift the narrative and shape culture, but also provide a space for stories that really would otherwise go untold. And Ardre is just so wonderful, and I loved everything she had to share, and I learned so much from this conversation. And I cannot wait to hear what you think. So make sure to join the conversation on our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are at Seek the Joy Podcast everywhere. If you're listening on Spotify, hit follow. If you're on Apple Podcasts, hit subscribe. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star rating and review. Ratings and reviews really help the show get seen by new people. So when you leave us that review, take a screenshot and send it to Sydney at seekthejoypodcast.com, and I'll send you a little something to say thank you. All right, guys, that's it. That's all I've got for the intro for this week's new episode. I'm so excited to bring you my conversation with Ardre. I learned so much from our conversation, and Ardre is really empowering Black voices and using storytelling to combat racism, both in society and in the overwhelmingly white publishing industry. And I'm excited to bring you her work with 13th and Joan and 100 Seeds of Promise. And this episode is a must listen to, I think, for everyone. So thank you, Ardre, for coming on the podcast. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Ardre Orie. I would love to start off by just talking about, who you are and the great work that you're doing with 13th and Joan and everything else in between.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Ardre Orie. I'm the CEO and founder of 13th and Joan Publishing House. And I started writing at the age of 10. I published my first book at that time and was just bitten by the writing bug. And I've had an affinity for words and an ongoing romance with them ever since. I recently realized that there was really a deficit in the numbers of African-American men who were published authors. And so I launched an initiative called 100 Seeds of Promise to combat that. And it was my commitment to make sure that that particular demographic had their stories see the light of day. And so I work religiously on that. And I'm very excited about, the future of the company as well as the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is so important. And there's so much to unpack about what you're doing. But I would love to touch on a little bit to begin with 100 Seeds of Promise. You had mentioned that there was a deficit of stories of Black men in these spaces. And I'm curious maybe why? What have you found through your time in publishing as to why these stories are really not shared?
I think that stories, first and foremost, those who recognize the importance, they know for certain that the narrative and the way that it is controlled is very important.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in many instances, people have attempted to control the narrative and not allow many of those stories to see the light of day. We've seen with, traditional publishing houses, the same thing happens in the music industry and every other industry that exists. There are just certain narratives that are desired to be pushed by a minority of people. And so that's really why we work to combat that. I had a father who said that he wanted to write a book about being a Black father and his relationship with his children. And he received several rejection letters. But the reason for the rejection was not about the content or the way that he had formulated the story. It was mostly saying that there was no market for stories such as that. And we all know that that's not true. Mm-hmm. Children need and deserve to see themselves in books, and they need and deserve to see images of their parents in books. And so that is that is exactly why we exist, because we know that, a lot of the control of the narrative has rested in the hands of people who don't represent the majority.
Mm-hmm. I think you bring up a really good point, which is your experience. Whatever you're experiencing, you should be the one telling that story. You should be the one sharing that story. It shouldn't be someone else reflecting on your experience. And I think that's such a good point of it's your life, it's your story. You should be the one to share it, and you should be the one to tell it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I've been advocating for that, for quite some time. I do believe that no one can tell your story better than you can. Mm-hmm. And so whenever you experience something, you should absolutely be the first to narrate that and to share that experience and to really go in depth about what you feel and what you think and how you see the world, because we all see the world through our own, lenses. And it's really important that we recognize that and we tell stories from that vantage point.
Mm-hmm. I think you're totally just spot on. And I think what's so cool about what you've done, not only with 13th and Joan, but also 100 Seeds of Promise, is the way I look at it is you've really created safe, honoring spaces to share these stories, a home for these stories. I just think that's incredible. I'm curious if that's how you look at it also.
It is. 13th and Joan is exactly that. I use the term safe space very often because not only is it hard to muster up the courage to say that you want to write something, but then to share it with the rest of the world and to kind of put yourself on display, it takes a level of intimacy and commitment to being that way. So we want to make sure that if an author gets to the point that they really want to share their story, that they do have a safe space to do it. And in addition to that, to make sure that they have a space that teaches them the right way and that, helps to format what we know to be quality literature in this space of, the world of publishing. So it's really important that we lead the charge because we have a heart for those stories.
Mm-hmm. I love what you just said about giving the tools to share those stories, to make sure that they are, successful in, the marketplace. But you're right. It also takes that insane, I think, sense of courage and vulnerability and intimacy to share your story. But I can imagine, too, there's another layer of sharing your story in a space that maybe hasn't felt safe or really hasn't been safe or welcome for someone to share their story, whether you're a person of color or you're a Black man or Black woman. I can only imagine that adds an extra layer of that level of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I mean, in so many instances, we as Black people, we've been given our history. We've been given content about ourselves. We've been provided with narratives that we did not write. We've also been left out of, a great deal of the stories that are told. And so it's really just empowering to know that there is an area that this can be done and that you don't have to water it down. A lot of times when we share our stories, especially many stories of people who go to traditional publishers or those who have been around for many years, they share, that they want to have their stories changed or, altered in some way. And so instead of being able to really be unapologetic in what you know to be true or the narrative that you wish to tell or depict, then, being forced or encouraged to change that is also something that can make you feel, it just doesn't feel good when it comes to the work that you're rendering out, and especially art. Art is interpretive. So for someone to tell you how to interpret your experience, it just won't work. And so, that's what we're up against on a daily basis.
I'm curious about the role of storytelling in all of this, in speaking to, systemic racism, racial inequality. I'm curious the role of storytelling. What role can it really play? How can it be used? I think maybe not only by those of us who are writing and sharing stories, but even those of us who are reading those stories and watching those stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, first and foremost, I think that when we are allowed to stand in truth, for example, everything that's happening right now, we just had the rendering of, really non-charges for Breonna Taylor's justice, the George Floyd. And these are just two scenarios that have happened while we were in quarantine. That says something very terrible about the state in which we are existing. But, Ahmaud Arbery, there's so many countless names. And so the fact that these are major topics of discussion on news stations and in print media, the conversation is open. The door is open to discuss and to talk about it. And so I am really encouraging people to really write what they're feeling during this time when it comes to racial injustice and inequality, because people are forced at this point to acknowledge that there is a problem. And those who are not acknowledging that there is a problem and that there has been a problem are simply a part of the problem, so we're really at a place where we cannot turn a blind eye to it. And so in doing that, this is really a great time for those who are creative and those who have stories and those who want to tell stories to share. This is a great time to be very candid, to be unapologetic in the narrative that is gleaned. And even, with the racism, with COVID, with this pandemic, everyone has experienced that in a completely different way. So to be able to document that now is such a great time for that, because we have people who are listening that were not listening before. We have, companies who are listening that were not listening before. We have press and media who are listening that were not listening before, and just in ways that they have not been listening. Now, does that mean that, we stop there because people are listening? Absolutely not. We have to really dig deeper into the systems that have been in place that are actually working just fine, which is why we are seeing, non-justice in scenarios that are before us. But writing these things down, taking ownership of truth, taking ownership of the narrative is key right now. And so I urge everyone, whether you write music, you write books, whatever it is that you do to create, this is the time to definitely document, because it will be fruitful. I know that for certain. People will look back on this time in history and have many questions. And so it's up to us to document it accurately and depict it the way that it is truly unfolding before our eyes.
And document it from your own personal experience. I think what has been so interesting about this time with COVID and the pandemic is exactly what you said, that more people are listening, more people are paying attention. I honestly think it's because we all spent so much time at home, and you're really having the opportunity to see things for what they are. And of course, it matters, what news outlet you listen to, how that information is shared. But that goes back to then why it is so important for you to document your own story and document your own experience and have that level of truth telling that's very personal to you, so that you yourself can go back and look, at this period of time. How did this make me feel? What was the experience? There's so much power in sharing your story and documenting it, I think, too, as you go.
Absolutely. So much power. And that is the number one thing that I am urging storytellers to claim is their power. There's so much power in the narrative. And so what we believe about ourselves, what we believe ourselves to be capable of, the experiences and the way in which they've happened, all of those things are what control how we exist, and how we show up in the world. So it is absolutely powerful to reclaim, if it is not claimed, and to take ownership of the narrative. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think what goes hand in hand with that too is really the power of the book industry, the power of media in its role to really shape culture and to really shift the narrative. And that's why I love what you are sharing and what you're saying in this podcast, but also in your work, because we can shift the dynamics. We can shift culture. We're already seeing that happening by more people standing up and speaking out. And I can only imagine a year from now, when books and articles and more start to come to light from this time, it's going to open people's eyes, I think, in a more profound way. Even I think there's so much that's going to come from this moment in time.
Absolutely. And I'm very hopeful. When people ask me, do you think that things will change? And based on what I've seen in this country, not a lot has changed over the years. There are many things that are still very much the same. And I do believe the system, the Constitution was written at a time where there was not even electricity. And so the fact that we're still honoring a document that is that old and, with very little edits is super concerning. When you think about a manuscript, the amount of times that it is edited is monstrous. And so to know that we are governing ourselves under the auspices of a document that was written so long and has been edited so little is very concerning. But what I am encouraged by is truth. I am encouraged by the people who are not afraid to stand on it. I am encouraged by the individuals who feel inspired by the pain, or who are called to action by the trauma, to make a difference and to allow younger generations to see what standing up and fighting looks like. And so those things encourage me. So while I don't know that I will see change in my lifetime where the systems have been eradicated, what I do know is that the truth will be, in black and white, and it cannot be denied.
You brought up a really good point, which is what I've been thinking a lot about lately. I'm reflecting back to even 4 or 5 years ago, and I wonder if I almost saw the world, if so many of us saw the world with this sense of rose-colored glasses on, if we thought more had changed because Barack Obama was president, or if we thought we had made better strides in the world because we felt maybe at the time that white supremacy wasn't so much on the rise. And so I'm curious, you brought up this point about trauma and being called to action by the trauma. I think as a society, sometimes we tend to suppress that trauma. We tend to push it down. But I'm finding more and more it's so important to bring it to light and to talk about it if and when you are comfortable, because not only on the other side of that is healing, but I think there's also a sense of understanding. So I'm curious if you have found that it's important to address this level of trauma, whether it can be trauma in all aspects of your life, but I think primarily what I'm asking is trauma from being marginalized, trauma from racism, trauma from inequity. I'm curious what your experience has been with addressing that trauma and maybe even why it's so important to do so.
Yes, the trauma that we speak of is first and foremost inherited. We not only experience our own trauma from present day, but we experience the trauma of knowing what our ancestors have been subjected to. And so that trauma, that pain, that anguish, that anxiety, all of those things are passed down. And what is even more saddening is that, yes, they're passed down, but we are expected to carry on, to perform in excellence. We are expected to move as if we have not been traumatized. We're expected to move as if we should be past what happened 400 years ago. But no one addresses the fact that if it's not erased, then that is a part of your DNA. This is how you are wired now to own that trauma. And so I do believe that there was an era where or, it continues where we see patterns of small bits and pieces of what feels like equality. We see someone advance. We see the few celebrities and entertainers who have made it, and people who don't understand the dynamics of systemic racism will say, well, look, you've got people who managed to find success, so all Black people cannot be oppressed. But that's not addressing the systems. Those are individuals, who have achieved, but it does not address the masses. It does not address the mass trauma that is embedded within each of us. And so for me, I think that there was a time that I certainly wanted to believe something different. I wanted to believe that I had brought children into a world that saw them for their value and their contributions and the type of people that they have been raised to be. But I think that during this time, no matter how much we wanted to look through rose-colored glasses, it was eye-opening yet again for all of us. And so what that feels like is essentially pulling back a scab. It's something that it has been a scar and it's there, but as it begins to heal, you tend to deal with it better. You tend to move forward. If it happened to be on your knee, you can walk a little better. And when you're in the shower, it doesn't hurt as bad. But when the scab is removed yet again, then you realize that scar has always been there. It's never left. And so that's really what racism feels like. That's really what the trauma that Black and brown people experience at the hands of this country. And so when we see leadership deny opportunities to speak out against it, when we see leadership acknowledge acts of violence as acts of courage, when we see leadership spew hate and encourage this type of behavior that has traumatized people for many years, we recognize that the real fault is in not seeing the value of a people who contribute so much. This country was built literally by Black people, with our hands. And so when you look at culture and you look at art and you look at business and you look at inventions, all of the contributions have been very meaningful to this country. And so to deny and suppress that is really a sad thing, to not see beyond, race and to not see beyond color, because there are some amazing things that have come from Black people. So I think that we just have to, trauma can be addressed in many different ways. I can say, personally speaking, there have been days where I felt like I just didn't want to get out of bed, like when after hearing about George Floyd, I didn't watch it because I watched Philando Castile. And that for me was more than I could have ever fathomed that happened. And to know that it's an ongoing thing, and that just happened to be something that was recorded and we saw it, and that just goes on a regular basis. But so there are days where the trauma can be physically debilitating. There are days when the trauma can be mentally, it can be socially, and then on the other side of that, I have lots of friends from, all races. And so really when the country kind of addressed both pandemics, the one with race and the one with COVID, a lot of my friends from other races were calling, they were calling me, they were calling my daughter, my teenage daughter, and they were asking, lots of questions. How can we help? What can we do? I didn't realize. And so then on top of the trauma, you're grateful to have people who care enough to ask how you're doing and what they can do to address it. But then you also have to teach. And so it really is exhausting, at times. Yeah. And so I am invigorated, though, because I know that I play a role in what will be documented. I don't take that lightly. I feel that it is my duty, my mission, my purpose to make sure that this is in black and white and to make sure that these experiences don't get left behind. So that, is what makes me say, okay, pull yourself together. You've got to get up. But being strong all the time, it can be cumbersome. Absolutely.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, how do you maintain your own sense of wellness and self-care and, I don't know, even just peace of mind some days when not only is this something you're experiencing? But then you're also having to teach or to share, or, so I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how have you really been able to, maintain this level of self-care and wellness, and take care of yourself and take care of your family? Has it been like a balancing act? Has it just been absolutely impossible?
Every day is different. I remember probably about 2 months ago, my youngest daughter and I went to the beach, and it's kind of just a tradition. We love to go to the beach, even though in Illinois the water is really cold. We're originally from Florida, so we don't get in the water. We just sit, in the sand and really just enjoy the scenery. And she just broke down. She started crying. She was bawling. And I'm like, where's this coming from? What's wrong? And she said, I just really wish that God would heal everything. And she meant, COVID, she meant racism and all of that. But that was her way of processing it. My oldest daughter participates in several of the protests, and that was her way of dealing with it. And so my way is to really empower more marginalized voices. And so every time I see an author release a book, and every time I see an author speak their truth and prepare to release a book to the world, that is kind of confirmation for me to move forward. On a personal note, I have to acknowledge that what I feel is sadness. That's not something that I associate with at all. I'm very much a happy person. When you see me, I have a smile. Sadness is not something that I identify with, but I had to come to grips with the fact that I was just sad, that this was the reality. So acknowledging that certainly helped me. Taking action is another thing that helps me. But I've also learned that when my body and my soul says to be still and to rejuvenate, then I have to do that as well. And so sometimes working can be a way to suppress the trauma that really should be realized and acknowledged. And so that's where I've come to. I've been able to just stop sometimes, turn everything off, turn off social media. I don't really watch the news. I stay abreast of current issues, obviously, but I try my best to not engage so much with the news because it really can become heavy. And then writing is a great escape. A lot of what I do in writing for my clients and writing for myself is escape, because we are, either I'm being someone else as a ghostwriter, or I'm working on a current romance novel. So that's definitely an escape. And when I feel like I need to get away from what is in front of me, then I can always turn to the paper as well.
I was going to say, I think trauma shows up in so many different ways and in different ways throughout the day. And sometimes, the best way to cope is to immerse yourself back in your work. I certainly do that. And then I realize I'm trying to avoid how I feel, and let me just spend, a minute or 5 minutes or an hour, whatever it might be, allowing myself to feel, allowing myself to experience. But it's difficult then too, I would imagine. You just brought up the news. Everything continues to get relitigated and reshared. And I think that's important, because I think people wake up with repetition. People pay attention with repetition. But then at the same time, I can imagine if it's something you're experiencing, it's like pouring lemon juice back into that scab that keeps coming off. And so I love what you shared about really it's about every day is different, and figuring out what's going to work, and listening to your body and listening to yourself with what you really need.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that we have to find those things. I'm also really working with my children with the transition, of school now being virtual and all of those things, just finding the joy. And that's what I've learned. I knew that, but this year has certainly reinforced the fact that joy is the actual treasure, deep joy, really being able to look out and see the sun and be thankful for just that, being able to listen to the birds and being thankful that you can hear them. Just being able to breathe is a blessing. And I mean that, figuratively and literally. It's being able to breathe. And so I just am thankful for the little things, the things that you cannot purchase thankful for the opportunity to walk in purpose, and, also try very hard to remain spiritually grounded
Yeah.
so that I don't let the world consume me. I just think that no matter what's happening, and all of these things are very important, I will never stop being on the front lines, fighting for equality and for justice. But then I also have to take a step back from time to time and just realize that I am a soul, and I just need to sometimes give my soul whatever it is that will make it feel full. So I work really hard on that. I also do a lot of work on alleviating things that are stressors that are not necessary. So bad vibes, bad energy, people who are not happy with themselves. I work really hard to just kind of live in a bubble to protect my joy and my peace.
I love everything that you just shared, and you took every single question that was popping in my head and you just started answering it. I love when that happens, because I was so curious about joy in your life. And I love what you said, that walking in purpose also brings you that sense of joy, and sharing your truth brings you that sense of joy, and knowing that you're helping others to share their truth and their experiences. I think it brings me to this idea that I think we often spend so much time making sure that we find our passion and find our purpose. But sometimes it really comes to you, and it's about seeing that purpose and feeling that passion and allowing it to fuel you and allowing it to become your joy. And you sound like that's exactly what you've done.
It's exactly what I've done,
Yeah.
And I don't take that for granted. I know that there are people who search a lifetime for their why. Why am I here? Why do I exist? And so the fact that I wake up every day with no alarm clock and walk right into mine, I know without question why I'm here. I don't even hesitate anymore when I am given an idea from the Most High. I already know what it is that I'm to be doing with it. And I also know that there will be provision made for me to execute those ideas. So that to me is just blessed. And I don't think that I could allow anything to consume me so much that I, lose sight of being blessed in that way. It's just not possible. So I am truly joyful. I'm truly happy, aside from anything or anyone, because I know why I exist.
Yeah, that knowing, that sense of like continued inspiration, that it keeps flowing and keeps confirming, that you are where you're supposed to be and you're doing, what you're supposed to be doing. What has been maybe the biggest lesson that you've learned? Maybe it's been throughout your career, or even within, I don't know, the last 9 months of COVID and everything else in between. Yeah, what has maybe been the biggest lesson that you've learned along the way?
My goodness, I've learned so much. And it continues to evolve. But the number one thing that I've learned, and I work to maintain, is that you have to do whatever it takes to be okay with the person you see in the mirror. And so that means making decisions that might not always feel good, but making sure that you can always wake up and live with yourself. So, doing what is right by others, working hard towards whatever it is that you desire to manifest, and, taking action is the other thing. I think that a lot of times we wish for things, but we don't necessarily want to do the work for them. And if it's something that we want, if it's a desire of our heart, if it's something that's been implanted in our soul, it will be challenging. And that's the thing, you figure, well, if I've been given this amazing idea, why must I climb a mountain to get there? But it's because of the view, that you will see. And it's because of the story of the journey in getting there, to the top of the mountain to look out. And so there is always a reason and a rationale behind things, but most importantly, just to make decisions that will make me okay with who I am when I wake up every single morning, that I've, done the best that I can for and by others.
Yeah, it's a level of acceptance, but also I think grace with yourself. And I think during such a difficult time, during such a difficult year, I think a lot of us at least that's what I've noticed through these conversations, have put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do more or be more or see more. And I think what you just shared is so beautiful and so powerful. It's about knowing who you are, accepting, who you are and what it is that you can do in any given moment. And also knowing when it's time to take it to the next level and take action or, create a plan to make those steps to get to where you want to be. I think that's such good advice because sometimes we wait in limbo, and we expect the next step to maybe come to us. But sometimes you really you got to put one foot in front of the other and see where it'll take you.
You must. And I think that the way in which you walk is important. You don't have to run. You can literally walk to wherever it is that you desire to go because it's already been ordered. Your steps have already been ordered, and it is really just about you exerting the effort to take the steps. But we don't, there's no race to the finish line. There's no racing against another person. Everything that we do in our lives is really about realizing it's the character arc is what I love to say. The character must evolve. You will not stay the same, nor should you aspire to do so. You will continue to take steps and to grow and to move into new spaces. And in doing that, you're going to find your faults. Those are going to be revealed. You're going to find the things that you're most proud of about yourself. You're going to come against challenges, but all of those are a part of what should be happening in your life and, bumping you in the right direction. So it's all truly a blessing.
I love what you said, that it matters the way you walk. You don't have to run. You don't have to sprint. It doesn't have to be a marathon. I think we feel a lot of pressure to get to the next or make the next thing happen. So what you just shared, I think is so powerful. I wrote it down and I can't wait for people to hear this part of the episode. During this time, there's been a lot of growth for so many. We've been talking about how really the rose-colored glasses have come off, and being in quarantine in the middle of a health pandemic, but also several other pandemics that are occurring at the same time. I think so many of us want to do more. We want to be more supportive to the Black community. We want to help lift up and raise voices and make sure these stories that you're sharing are being told and being shared. And so I'm curious if you have any advice, whether it's for someone in the media or just someone at their job or listening, whoever it might be, how can someone begin to support these stories and support these experiences and not only ensure that they're told, but ensure that they're told from the person who's sharing it, their experience. I guess what I'm trying to get at is being an ally in these storytelling spaces, being an ally in this way. I'm curious if you have any insights or any advice along those lines.
Sure. Allies are so very valuable, and they can operate in so many different ways. There are no limits. I've seen everything on social media from, people serving as allies with their bodies to people serving as allies with their minds and with their integrity and, with their hearts and their actions. And so it's really, really important. I cannot stress that enough. But what that looks like is, in your household, look around. If you're a parent, look around and see if you have any children's books written by Black authors. Do you have any books that you are using to show your child that the world exists of, more people than just your own race? When you are going to purchase a book, have you purchased a book from a Black author ever? Have you read one? Does it, have a place on your bookshelf? That's something very, very simple because that exposes you to the writing of someone who is Black. It's a very simple yet profound action to take. In the corporate space, you can look at the hires. Look at who is hired for various activities. I was just sit on a school board, and something that we were discussing is that there is training for diversity, right? But there are no Black people who sit on the committee. So it's like, well, how diverse is this going to be? Are we going to really hear the viewpoints that need to be expressed?
Right.
Furthermore, when we look at the curriculum that had been adopted for diversity training, it was not written by a Black person either. So you have to dig deeper than just what you see on the surface. What was thought is that, well, great, we have a diversity training initiative. So that is taking steps and that is effort. And absolutely it is. But looking beneath that, you're looking just deeper into the surface to say, okay, great. Well, who's a part of this diversity initiative? For the first time in the district that I am in, we celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King. And you would think that that's an automatic, thing that happens, but they had never celebrated, never commemorated. And so I was really excited to be a part of bringing that to fruition, that this was something that was recognized. The same thing with Columbus Day and bringing forth that it would be called Indigenous Peoples Day. So it is serving in capacities like that to ask the people who are around you and to, ask what they need. Number one, how can you be of assistance? But also looking at the spaces where diversity is not happening and finding those people. Most recently, there was a CEO, and I will not say the name of the bank because I don't want to get it wrong, but he said that there was just not enough talent in the pool to find, executives. And that's simply not the case. Where are you looking exactly? Where are you trying to find talent? Because there's plenty of talent out there, but if they are not granted the interviews, if we are still forced to put race on applications, then, obviously it is still something that is considered. So looking at hiring practices in the corporate sector is very important. In the school district, look at the curriculum. Is there a curriculum that teaches African American history? In many instances, there's not. My daughter is enrolled in AP courses. She's got, AP Euro. She's got German. She's got all these things, but there is not the opportunity for her to learn about her own culture. We have to do that at home. So when it comes to education in the sector, look to see what is going on with the curriculum and if there is a diverse offering of curriculum. The same thing happens in the music industry. Who are you supporting? What music are you listening to? What genres? And we all know that music is something that you can support no matter what, because music is just something that connects us all. So look at the artists that you're listening to and exposing yourself to. And it just is in every area of life. If you look around you and you see no diversity, question it. Wonder why. Determine how you can make that different. And then when we look at the systems that are in place, such as resources that are allocated from a political sector or in your community, your local community, where does that funding actually go? Where do donations go? Where does the funding for the educational initiatives, the community initiatives, where is the funding going? And look to see who's actually being supported. These are all ways, really simple ways, and things that we do every day that we can acknowledge that not only Black people are not making everything about race, but that we really do have a race relations issue that needs to be addressed. And there really are systems in place that oppress people. And so we have to acknowledge it, number one, and then we have to take action in order to serve as an ally. So thank you for asking me that question, because I think that it's a great question. There's no right or wrong answer, but just serving as an ally is an action that is welcomed and necessary.
Yeah, it sounds like really the first step is about acknowledging that there's a problem, and then being vigilant and asking questions, being curious, looking into things that maybe you didn't look into before, because I think I'm certainly guilty of this. I run on autopilot sometimes, you're so busy. You've got so much going on. You don't think to question. You don't put on that lens of curiosity. But I think it's about, like you said, acknowledging there's a problem, then taking it the next step and being vigilant and asking questions and being curious. And then it sounds like it's then figuring out how you can play a role in making a difference, what you can do to deal with these different, institutions, or it's a school district, or it's at work, or it's the books that you're buying. I mean, I love the way that you broke it down. And I'm so grateful for what you shared, because it's actionable in a very realistic and approachable way, which I think is so needed. Because I think sometimes people feel intimidated. They don't know where to start.
Right. Absolutely. And that was a question that I got a lot, from my friends. They said, I don't even know what to do. And, acknowledging the fact that they felt like, okay, well, I can't be racist because I have a Black friend, but if I'm your only Black friend, you should ask yourself, if you have made a concerted effort to befriend others, or where you are, that this does not happen. So it's just something that we have to wonder, because we are one or the only. And so we have to ask ourselves the same questions, everyone, why are we, in the environments we're in, and how do we play a role in all of this?
Mm-hmm. I think you're spot on, and that's great advice. Thank you so much, seriously, for everything that you have shared during this conversation. I think the role of storytelling, the role of speaking up, advocating, using your voice, and ensuring that your story is being shared is incredibly powerful. And Ardre, before we go, I have to ask you the question I ask everybody that comes on the podcast, and that is, what is your biggest dream?
Wow. Well, what's so funny about that walking in purpose, and knowing, and as I shared with you earlier about being very, very sure of the way that things manifest. For whatever reason, God will show me something, and I don't know when it will manifest, but it always manifests. And I don't take that seeing lightly. And I don't mean like, oh, I can see into the future. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that he will give me very clear visions. And so I dream with my eyes open. And he showed me that 13th and Joan, because right now, as it stands, the major publishing houses have been in existence for many, many years. I mean, at a time where even, we weren't permitted to read. It was illegal for Black people to read. And so what I see is 13th and Joan being a monument that is established that long, where it becomes something that is around for, well over 100 years, and that the work that we seek to do continues to be not only normal, but sets a precedent for leadership in this industry, and that it really provides a microphone for voices that have been marginalized. So it's not only a dream, it's something that I know will absolutely manifest. And I don't know if I will actually see it, but I know that it will come to fruition. And so my job is to just lay the foundation, which is what I do every day.
Mm-hmm. You're doing it. And I'm just so grateful for that we've connected and that we had this conversation. And it just occurred to me, 100 seeds of promise, laying the foundation, planting those seeds, so much beauty is going to come from what it is that you're doing. So Ardre, I can't thank you enough for coming on Seek the Joy podcast. Where can everybody find you, connect with 13th and Joan, 100 Seeds of Promise, and all of the other wonderful things that you're doing?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let me say thank you, because, I can hear through your demeanor and the conversation that we're having, the sincerity. And it is very meaningful to me. I value it. I don't take it for granted. So thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this discussion with you and sharing this.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. And so please find me on social media at I am Ardre Orie, and that is ARDREORIE. I'm on all social media at I am Ardre Orie, and that is my website as well. And then for 13th and Joan, it is 13THANDJOAN. We are on all social media at 13th and Joan, and that is our website as well.
Perfect. Everything is going to go in the show notes. It'll be so easy for everyone to connect and learn more. And this has been such a pleasure. I can't thank you enough. And I'm looking forward to staying connected and following all of the great work that you're doing. So thank you so much again, Ardre.
Thank you so much, Sydney. It's a pleasure to speak with you, and I look forward to all that you are doing as well. Keep up the amazing work.
Thank you.